Well, as we reported on Thursday, the Angus Reid Institute released details of a new study this week, and it doesn't look very good for Canada's main party leaders. Aggregating both positive and negative impressions of Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau, and Pierre Poilievre, and this is the net result. Negative impressions across the board, with the Institute saying there has never been a time when leaders of all three parties simultaneously turned Canadians off to such an extent. Well, to talk about this, we're now joined by Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse, and Kristy Kirkup, Parliamentary Reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hello to the three of you.
Hey there.
Hi.
Hello. So listen, I'm going to continue this thought, and this is the reasoning behind these negative numbers, according to the Angus Reid Institute. Take a listen. Many pundits and observers have speculated that politics has never been this divisive, with party leaders who seek to exploit differences rather than overcome them. Even Canadians have voiced concern that there is no room for compromise or that their voices aren't heard. This frustration and division appears to have created the perfect conditions for political dissatisfaction, and this has culminated in historically unpopular leadership at the federal level. Again, that's from Angus Reid. Tonda, I'll get you to start us out. What do you make of that reasoning?
I think it's a bit more complicated than that. It's not just that there's political dissatisfaction because politics are polarized. I think politics have become polarized in large measure because essentially, you know, those numbers corresponded, they showed a certain correspondence of the decline of leadership ratings around the time when you saw Stephen Harper in power, Mulcair, Trudeau, sort of that dynamic happening, and they're going forward. But I think what really was going on there, the backdrop is the era of big social media, big data, big tech came along. And that drove all political parties to not just message differently as political parties within the House of Commons or Parliament or on mainstream media, but it drove different styles of fundraising messaging on their own social media channels. And we're all aware of, excuse me, that's my phone. We're all aware of how that changed sort of the way politics is done in the House of Commons, you know, the drive for clips to put on social media, to drive clicks, to drive dollars to parties. And I think another thing that happened, and I'll wrap up on that, is sort of Canada moved away from a system that it experimented with for a few years of public financing for political parties, which took away the impetus to drive fundraising dollars all the time with negative messaging, which is more clickable and gets more reaction from people and voters, potential voters. So I think, look, it's a complicated picture. I absolutely agree. It's more divided now than I've ever seen it in my 25 years on Parliament Hill and more than 40 years reporting. And I think, though, there are a lot of reasons feeding into it. What I don't see is any political party leader addressing it by correcting their own behavior or their own party's behavior.
I'll pick up on that in a second, but first, what is your thought? This idea that Canadians are sick of all the leaders because they're sick of the partisanship?
Well, I think that should lead political leaders to ask themselves deep questions about their behavior and the kind of language they use, not only in the House of Commons, but when they address their own partisans. There used to be a time when you wouldn't call the Prime Minister a wacko. That shows a lot of disrespect for the institution, but also the person who occupies that institution. And if the person who actually worked with an institution shows such disrespect for one another, how can Canadians in their own end have some respect for the leadership that is actually in those institutions? So it's as we say in French, un couteau à double tranchant.
Double-edged sword.
Thank you so much. And it does cut a lot of people when you swipe it. So that's the end result, I think, are in those numbers.
Yeah, and thank you for saving us a bit on translation, the dollars there. Kristy, what do you make of it, though? Because, you know, without a doubt, we are dealing with some very partisan debate, and it doesn't, to Tonda's point, it seemed to be letting up at all.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really, you know, I think ahead to the next election campaign, whenever that election is going to take place, likely the fall of 2025. And I don't see it getting any better. And I think that should be worrisome for everyone. I do agree with Joël-Denis that, you know, it is incumbent upon the political leaders and people within the political apparatus to try and kind of raise the bar in terms of the dialogue, the nature of respect that they're showing to one another. But I'm not trying to sound like an optimist today, or like I'm not an optimist, but I really see the situation deteriorating, and frankly, I'm not really sure how we come back from this.
And, to that point, today there was an op-ed published by Charlie Angus, the outgoing NDP MP, and he's been in Parliament for 20 years, and he wrote very vividly about the threats that MPs are facing right now. And honestly, I read that, and I didn't need another reminder, but it just again made me think, like, I don't see how this doesn't end without someone getting seriously hurt. People are being driven to embrace very violent messaging, if I could say that, and some of the sort of the opposition and the sort of whatever means justifies or whatever end justifies the means. I think that we've got to be really concerned. We've seen it happen in many other democracies, and I think we should take politicians at their word that they are seeing a level of threat against themselves that's not acceptable.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that, though, is, and this is not to point the finger at anyone. If someone leaves for whatever reasons, and if one of those reasons happen to be safety, who are we to criticize they're feeling endangered? But it's not as if those that are concerned can easily stand up, because the system seems to be even working against those who are on the Hill in the House of Commons who are trying to make it better. You're nodding your head there.
Yeah, I totally agree with your assessment of it. And Charlie Angus is one MP who's left with writing some letters to his constituents. But Pam Damoff, also a Toronto area MP, wrote a letter last week that ran in the Toronto Star and some other newspapers, and she laid out the same reasons why she's leaving politics. And I've learned that there will be new measures, security measures offered to MPs. And one of those will be that MPs in their own riding will be able to get police protection if they want it, and that will be paid by the House of Commons. And that should become announced in a few weeks, just to reassure those who are exercising that noble profession and those who would like to enter that profession. Because if we see people leaving, writing such letters saying that I don't feel secure in my own job, how can you attract other people to get into and try to get elected into office if you've got that atmosphere of insecurity to deal with? So that's a very bad problem we have on our hand right now as a democracy.
Yeah, as a democracy, and there have been past politicians who have spoken out about the lack of civility right now. In fact, when Brian Mulroney passed away, Joe Clark was actually sitting right here, and he put out a call saying we need to bring it down. We need to get back to the point where you can appreciate the difference in opinion, but not hate the person who's making the argument against you. And his concern is that at the end of the day, if this does not get under control, we're going to erode Canadian democracy, people's feelings for Canadian democracy, people's willingness to defend Canadian democracy. You covered the last campaign. What do you think about that?
I think that's really true, and I'll be honest with you, I think maybe that's why I sometimes think about going forward what the picture is going to look like in terms of what we're covering, and frankly, I think also the pushback against journalists as well. We certainly saw that during the course of the last election campaign. I traveled with Justin Trudeau for a bulk of that campaign. There was a lot of discussion at that time, of course, about COVID-19 vaccines. Some people were showing up at events who were really upset about that, and they were also palpably really upset with Justin Trudeau, which I kind of saw as a bit of a warm-up act, frankly, to the convoy that showed up on Parliament Hill that subsequent winter. The point being is that just the anger piece is just there towards Justin Trudeau, frankly, in such I think, tangible way that it's hard to imagine, again, what that next campaign looks like because of the expletives that are being shouted at Justin Trudeau. That's not just, it's not just something that a few people are saying. You can come across those types of bumper stickers now in the parking. I'm amazed at how often I'm actually seeing those types of bumper stickers and postcards, F Trudeau, at the grocery store. I don't know how that happened, but it's kind of moved into, I think, the palpable anger against Trudeau is a big theme.
And the danger about that is that those who actually exploit that anger may peril afterwards because of that anger. They may suffer the same consequences. So it's you playing with fire. So I think that message should be heeded by some people who are actually exploiting that anger to their advantage. Because at one point, if you become the prime minister or you govern, you may suffer the same consequences as the one you are trying to achieve to your political opponent.
I don't think anybody's arguing for a lack of vigorous debate. I think that the House of Commons,
exactly.
'Twas ever thus, there was always vigorous debate there. And I've had people say to me, oh, well, there was always threats and there was always downplaying what's happening now. This is a different level. Those numbers show it. Everybody's experience of it here shows it. But that is not to say that policies can't be absolutely stripped down and governments called to account and opposition leaders demanded for their policies in return. I don't think anybody's arguing. We need that. That's what democracy really needs. But there's got to be a way to do it. No one would. I mean, I hope most parents wouldn't tolerate their children behaving like that to their friends, right? So.
Yeah, and yet this is the level, and I think that very much is a concern. But echoing what you said earlier, I don't know how this is brought back. I don't think it's brought back before the next election, which makes me wonder just how I guess the nice word is passionate, how heated and perhaps even dangerous it might become to cover some of these events and also to be part of it.
People are really worried about it. I think the police and the security people around the current political leadership is worried about it. I think the political leadership is worried about it. And I think a lot of observers are genuinely concerned that they don't know either. But that doesn't mean to say it's a lost cause. There's some of this can be turned around. The temper of the times can be turned by discourse. If you want political discourse to be more civil, then make it more civil.
Okay, quickly running time. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, it brings me to the 1988 election about free trade. That was a very passionate election, but it still remains civilized. I mean, most of the time, I would say. But still, I mean, that was a very passionate election. Yep. But at the end of the day, people voted and people respected the results. And then I think that's what should be. There are some people who should learn some lessons from that election
Brian
campaign.
Mulroney and John Turner were very friendly at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
And Kristy, last word to you.
I think sometimes, especially I felt this during the last campaign, that in Canada, I feel like we really don't take these issues that seriously. It's like, even during 2021, it was, people have always faced these types of threats. I think the reality is, and I think there's data to back it up, that the threats are evolving. And we have to, I think, as a society, take a really hard look at this and actually take it seriously, because it's not just something that is happening in the United States, for example. It is happening here, and I'm glad we're talking about it, because it is an important part of the conversation of what is playing out in our democracy.
Well, I'm glad you're here to talk about it as well, Kristy. Thank you for this. And Tonda and Joël-Denis, as always, thank you to you.
Have a great weekend.
You too.